I trusted my father with everything, until the day he asked me to sign some routine paperwork that destroyed my life. What I didn't know was that those innocent-looking documents were actually the biggest betrayal imaginable, a calculated scheme to steal everything I owned. But here's the thing about people who betray you. They never see their own betrayal coming. And what my father taught me about trust? I used every single lesson to orchestrate the most poetic revenge you've ever heard. I never thought the man who taught me never to trust strangers would be the one I should have never trusted at all. It was a Tuesday morning when Dad showed up at my office with his leather briefcase and that warm smile I'd known my whole life. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, like he'd done 1,000 times before. "Got some paperwork here that needs your signature. Just routine stuff for the estate planning we talked about last month, remember?" I looked up from my laptop and smiled back. Of course I remembered. We'd had dinner at Romano's, and he'd mentioned wanting to get our family's financial affairs in order now that Mom had been gone for 2 years. It made sense. Dad was getting older, turning 67 that fall, and I was his only child. Everything he'd built, the commercial real estate company, the properties, the investments, would eventually come to me anyway. That's what he'd always said. "Sure, Dad," I said, reaching for the pen on my desk. "Where do I sign?" He flipped through the stack of papers, maybe 15 or 20 pages, pointing to little sticky tabs he'd placed at the signature lines. "Here, here, and here," he said casually, that same reassuring tone he'd used when teaching me to ride a bike, when helping me study for college exams, when walking me through my first property acquisition after I joined the family business 5 years ago. I should have read them. God, I should have read every single word. But this was my father, the man who'd held my hand at Mom's funeral, the man who'd told me since I was little that family was everything, that blood meant loyalty, that we Carters stuck together no matter what. Why would I question him? So I signed, page after page, my signature flowing across those dotted lines without a second thought. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. Dad gathered up the papers, tucked them back into his briefcase, and gave me a hug before leaving. "Thanks, honey. You're making this transition so much easier for both of us." Transition. That word should have been a red flag, but I was too busy, too trusting, too damn stupid to catch it. 3 days later, my world exploded. I was grabbing coffee at Starbucks before heading to a site inspection when my phone rang. It was Janet from First National Bank, where we'd done business for 20 years. "Miss Carter, I'm calling because there's been some unusual activity on your accounts, and I wanted to verify." "What kind of activity?" I asked, stirring cream into my latte. "Well, it appears all your accounts have been closed and the funds transferred, the business accounts too. And there's a notation here that you're no longer listed as the owner of Carter Commercial Properties. I'm looking at documents that show your father as sole proprietor now, and..." The coffee cup slipped from my hand, splashing across the floor. People around me stared, but I couldn't move. "What? That's impossible. There must be some mistake. The paperwork looks legitimate, all notarized and filed with the state. I'm looking at your signature right here, dated 3 days ago. You authorized the complete transfer of assets to Robert Carter." My signature. Those papers. That Tuesday morning. Oh God. I barely remember driving to the office, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got there, the locks had been changed. My keycard didn't work. Through the glass doors, I could see Marcus, our operations manager, packing up his desk. I pounded on the door until he came over. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" He looked at me with something between pity and confusion. "Your dad sent out an email yesterday. Said he's selling the company to Davidson Group, that you'd resigned, and that today was my last day. I thought you knew." "I didn't resign. I didn't know about any sale." The panic in my voice made him step back. "Where's my father? He's been in meetings with the buyers all week. Haven't seen him since Wednesday." I called Dad's cell phone 27 times that afternoon. Every call went straight to voicemail. I drove to his house in Maplewood, the house I'd grown up in, but his car wasn't there. I called his friends, his golf buddies, even his lawyer's office. No one had seen him, or if they had, they weren't telling me. That night, sitting in my apartment, wait, not even my apartment anymore, I realized with growing horror. The deed was probably in his name now too. Everything was in his name. The betrayal hit me in waves, each one worse than the last. How long had he been planning this? Was that story about estate planning all bullshit? Had he been setting this trap for months, maybe years? I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat there on my couch, scrolling through my phone, looking at photos of us together. Dad teaching me about property values when I was 16. Dad shaking my hand when I closed my first deal. Dad raising a champagne glass at my college graduation. So damn proud. Had any of it been Real? Or was I always just a means to an end? The worst part? I'd actually felt grateful when he asked me to join the company after college. Like he was doing me this huge favor, letting me work alongside him, learn the business. Now I understood. He needed me to build value into something he was planning to steal. By Friday, the full scope of the disaster became clear. I met with a lawyer named Patricia Hughes, who laid it all out with a kind of clinical detachment that made me want to scream. You signed a comprehensive asset transfer agreement. Everything you owned, personal accounts, business interests, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, it all went to your father. And yes, it's legal. You signed it voluntarily, it was notarized, and it's been properly filed. But I didn't know what I was signing, I protested. Patricia gave me a sad smile. That's not a legal defense. You're a 32-year-old businesswoman with a college degree. The law assumes you read documents before signing them. Was there fraud? Possibly. But proving your father intentionally deceived you, that's incredibly difficult, especially when there's no record of what he actually told you. So I just lose everything? I'm sorry. Without evidence of coercion or clear fraud, yes. The paperwork is airtight. I walked out of her office in a daze. 10 years of work, gone. My inheritance from Mom, stolen. My entire future, erased. And the man who did it? The man who raised me, who taught me, right from wrong, who promised he'd always protect me. He'd vanished like a thief in the night, which, I guess, is exactly what he was. The rumors started spreading fast. In commercial real estate, everyone knows everyone, and the Carter family name had meant something in this city for 30 years. Now it meant betrayal. I heard whispers at the coffee shop, saw former colleagues cross the street to avoid me. Some people thought I was in on it somehow, that I'd helped my dad pull off some elaborate scheme. Others just pitied me. Poor stupid girl who got conned by her own father. Both versions made me sick. I was broke within 2 weeks. The apartment lease was in his name, so I had to leave. My car? Technically registered to the company, now sold, so that got repossessed. I moved into a shitty studio in the bad part of town, the kind of place where you hear sirens all night and the elevator smells like piss. I picked up shifts at a restaurant just to pay rent and buy groceries. Me, who used to negotiate million-dollar property deals, now wearing an apron and asking people if they wanted fries with that. Every day was humiliation. Every night was rage. Then one Tuesday, exactly 4 weeks after I'd signed my life away, Dad finally called me. We should talk, he said, like we were casual acquaintances instead of family, like he hadn't just committed the cruelest kind of betrayal imaginable. You think? My voice dripped with venom. Meet me at the house. Saturday, 2:00. He hung up before I could respond. I almost didn't go. What was the point? He'd already taken everything. But there was this tiny, pathetic part of me that still hoped maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he'd been blackmailed. Maybe there was some reason that would make this horror make sense. Saturday came. I borrowed a car from Jenna, the only friend who hadn't abandoned me, and drove to Maplewood. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell of my childhood. Home. A house I no longer had any claim to. Dad answered wearing khakis and a polo shirt, looking relaxed, looking happy even. That's what broke me. He wasn't tormented or guilt-ridden. He looked like a man who'd just won the lottery. Come in, he said. I followed him to the living room where Mom's portrait still hung over the fireplace. I wondered if she was watching this, if she was ashamed of what her husband had become, or maybe she'd known all along what kind of man he really was. I suppose you want an explanation, Dad said, pouring himself a scotch. He didn't offer me one. That would be nice, yeah. He sat down in his leather armchair, the one Mom had bought him for their 20th anniversary. You really want to know the truth? Fine. You never deserved what you had. None of it. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Your mother, God rest her soul. She wanted to leave everything to you. Made me promise that when she got sick. Take care of our daughter, Robert. Make sure she's set up for life, as if you'd done anything to earn it. He took a sip of scotch, savoring it. Do you know how hard I worked to build that company? 35 years of 16-hour days, of kissing ass and taking risks and making sacrifices. And then what? I'm supposed to just hand it all over to you because you're my kid. I worked there too. I brought in clients, closed deals. You played at working, he interrupted. Everyone was nice to you because you were the boss's daughter. You think you earned their respect. You were a diversity hire in your own family business. The cruelty of it stunned me into silence. When your mother died, I realized something. Dad continued. I didn't have to keep that promise. Why should I spend my golden years watching you run my company into the ground while I rot in some retirement home? Why should you get to enjoy the fruits of my labor? So I made a new plan. A better plan. The estate planning, I whispered. Exactly. Took me almost 2 years to set it all up properly, get all the documents in order. Had to be airtight, legally speaking. And it was so easy. You signed everything without even reading the first page. Do you know how insulting that was? I put all that effort into making it legitimate, and you couldn't even be bothered to skim it. There it was. The final insult wrapped in an admission. He'd spent 2 years plotting my destruction, and I'd walked right into it with a smile. The company's being sold, he said. Davidson Group is paying $8.2 million. The properties will bring in another couple million. Your mother's life insurance, the investments, all of it. Mine now. I'm thinking about buying a place in Arizona, maybe Scottsdale, somewhere warm where I can golf year-round. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The man sitting in front of me wearing my father's face was a stranger, a monster. I do feel a little bad, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. You're struggling, I hear. Working at some diner? Restaurant, I corrected automatically, hating myself for it. Right. Well, here. He pulled out his wallet and tossed $300 bills on the coffee table between us. Get yourself something nice. Consider it a parting gift from your old man. $300. After stealing millions. The insult was almost funny. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. You know what Mom would say if she could see you right now? Your mother's dead, he said flatly. And the dead don't get opinions. I walked to the door in a daze, his words echoing in my skull. You never deserved what you had. But my hand froze on the doorknob when I heard him behind me, that satisfied chuckle that used to mean he'd closed a good deal. Have a nice life, sweetheart, or whatever's left of it anyway. Something snapped inside me in that moment. The grief, the humiliation, the rage, it all crystallized into something cold and sharp. I turned around slowly. See you around, Dad. He smiled. I doubt it, but he was wrong about that. I drove back to my shitty studio apartment with my mind racing. $300 sat in my pocket, burning like hot coals. I should have thrown it in his face, should have told him to shove it up his ass, but I kept it, because now I had a new purpose, and I was going to need every penny. That night, I pulled out every document I had from the company, every file I'd kept from my 5 years working there, property records, contracts, correspondence, anything that might be useful. And I started reading, not skimming, not trusting, but really reading, every word, every clause, every footnote. It took me 3 days to find it. Buried in a property acquisition from 2019, there was an environmental assessment for a commercial lot Dad had purchased on Marshall Avenue. The report showed contamination, lead and asbestos, that would have required extensive and expensive remediation before development. But Dad had never done the remediation. He'd filed falsified inspection reports with the city, claiming the site was clean, and then leased it to a daycare center, a fucking daycare center, on contaminated land, with forged safety documents. My hands shook as I read through the file. This wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. Fraud, definitely. Endangering children, possibly. And if those falsified reports could be traced back to him, if I could prove he'd knowingly put kids at risk for profit, he'd lose everything. The company sale would fall through. Criminal charges would follow. Prison time even. But I needed proof. The original environmental report was in my files, but I needed the fake ones he'd submitted to the city. And for that, I needed access to municipal records and maybe, if I got really lucky, his own files. I spent the next week working every angle I could think of. I called in favors from former colleagues who hadn't completely written me off. I flirted with a clerk at City Hall until he let me dig through old building permits. I even broke down and called Patricia Hughes again, asking theoretical questions about environmental fraud without explaining why I wanted to know. Slowly, piece by piece, the evidence came together. The falsified inspection reports with Dad's signature, the emails from him to the contractor, explicitly telling them to skip the remediation, the lease agreement with Bright Futures Daycare, dated 6 months after he knew the site was contaminated. It was damning. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy, a way to use this information that would hurt him the way he'd hurt me. And then, lying awake at 3 a.m. in my cramped studio, listening to my neighbor's TV blaring through the thin walls, I had it. The same trick he'd used on me, the same trap, the same betrayal. I drafted a document, carefully, meticulously, with the help of a lawyer I paid with my last bit of savings. It was presented as a settlement agreement, offering me a small monthly stipend in exchange for my silence about the unfortunate circumstances of the asset transfer. But hidden in the dense legal language of Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 4, was something else entirely. An admission of the environmental fraud, a transfer of all liability back to Robert Carter personally, and an agreement to cooperate fully with any federal or state investigations. It was beautiful. It was vicious. It was exactly what he deserved. The hard part was getting him to sign it. I waited another week, letting him get comfortable in his victory. Then I called from a number he wouldn't recognize. "Mr. Carter, this is Jennifer Walsh from Davidson Group. We need you to sign some additional documentation before we can finalize the sale. Just routine compliance stuff, but our lawyers are insisting on it." There was a pause. "Can't you just email it?" "I'm afraid not, sir. Our protocol requires wet signatures on these particular forms. I can meet you anywhere that's convenient. Your office, your home, wherever works best." Another pause. Longer this time. Was he suspicious? Did he smell the trap? "Fine," he finally said. "My house. Tomorrow at 10. I almost couldn't believe it worked. The next morning, I showed up at his door wearing a blazer I'd bought at Goodwill and carrying a leather folder that looked professional enough. I'd dyed my hair darker and wore glasses I didn't need. Not much of a disguise, but enough that he might not immediately recognize me. He opened the door, squinting at me in the morning sun. "Jennifer Walsh?" "That's right, Mr. Carter. Thanks so much for making time for this." I kept my voice slightly higher, my accent a bit different. "Should only take a few minutes." He let me in, the same living room where he'd destroyed me 6 weeks earlier. I set the folder on the coffee table and pulled out the document. "Just need your signature here, here, and here," I said, pointing to the tabs I'd placed. The exact same thing he'd done to me. The symmetry was almost poetic. He picked up the pen, started to flip through the pages. My heart stopped. If he actually read it, if he saw what he was signing. "This is a lot of paperwork for routine compliance," he muttered. "Standard stuff, I'm afraid. You know how lawyers are. They want everything in triplicate." I smiled, channeling every ounce of false warmth I had. "Honestly, it's mostly just restating terms you've already agreed to. Nothing unexpected." He nodded slowly, still flipping through. I could see his eyes scanning the text, but not really reading, not really processing, just looking for the signature lines, the same way I had. "Your company did the due diligence on the properties already, right?" he asked. "Oh, absolutely. Everything checked out perfectly." Lie. "That's why we're so excited to move forward with this acquisition." That seemed to reassure him. His shoulders relaxed. The pen touched paper. He signed. First page, second page, third page. Each signature felt like a small victory, a tiny piece of justice being served. But I kept my face neutral, professional, just a lawyer's assistant doing her job. When he finished, I gathered up the papers quickly, sliding them back into the folder before he could have second thoughts. Perfect. That's everything we need. Davidson Group will be in touch about the final closing. "When should I expect the wire transfer?" he asked. "Our accounting department should process everything within 2 weeks. Maybe sooner if all goes smoothly." He walked me to the door, actually smiling now. "Thanks for making this easy." "My pleasure, Mr. Carter." I paused at the threshold, letting myself look directly at him for just a moment. "By the way, you might want to check your mailbox in a few days. There's some additional paperwork coming your way." He barely registered the comment, already pulling out his phone to call someone, probably his realtor in Scottsdale. I walked to my borrowed car, folder clutched tight against my chest, and I didn't let myself react until I was 3 blocks away. Then I pulled over, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. And I screamed, a raw, primal sound of rage and triumph and grief all mixed together. He'd signed it, the same way I had, without reading, without questioning, without a single goddamn second of hesitation. The next day, I filed the document with the State Attorney General's office along with all the evidence I'd gathered about the Marshall Avenue property. I sent copies to the EPA, to the city's building department, to the local news stations, and to Davidson Group's legal team. Within 48 hours, the shit hit the fan. The company sale was immediately suspended. Davidson Group released a statement saying they were shocked and dismayed by revelations of environmental fraud and were conducting a thorough review. The Attorney General opened a criminal investigation. Bright Futures Daycare evacuated their facility and filed a lawsuit. The local news ran a story. Prominent developer faces fraud charges after allegedly exposing children to toxic site. And the best part? That document Dad had signed? It meant he couldn't claim ignorance. He'd literally put his signature on a confession. His own lawyer called it the most spectacularly stupid thing I've ever seen a client do. Karma's a bitch, and her name is Sarah fucking Carter. The calls started almost immediately. Dad tried to reach me dozens of times, but I never answered. Let him sweat. Let him panic. Let him feel what I felt. That sick horror of watching your world crumble and realizing you'd caused your own destruction. His lawyer sent a letter claiming the document was fraudulent, that I'd impersonated a Davidson Group employee. I sent back a simple reply. Prove it. My signature isn't on that paperwork. Just his, because I'd been smart. I'd used gloves when handling the documents. The only fingerprints on those pages were his. And while yes, I'd misrepresented myself, good luck proving that in court when I'd been so careful not to leave any trail. The investigation moved fast. Turns out, once you start digging into someone's business practices, you find all sorts of interesting things. The Marshall Avenue fraud was just the beginning. There were tax irregularities, payroll issues, suspicious insurance claims, 35 years of cutting corners and bending. Rules, all coming due at once. Within 6 weeks, Robert Carter was indicted on 14 counts including fraud, forgery, and reckless endangerment. The assets he'd stolen from me, frozen by the court pending civil litigation. The house in Maplewood, listed for sale to pay his mounting legal bills. That dream retirement in Scottsdale, replaced by the very real possibility of 15 years in federal prison. I'd love to say I felt satisfied, but mostly I just felt empty. Revenge is supposed to taste sweet, but it's really more like ashes. You burn down someone else's life, and the smoke just makes it harder to see your own. But I wasn't done rebuilding yet. With Dad's assets frozen, I filed an emergency motion to reclaim the properties and business interests he'd stolen, arguing that they'd been obtained through fraud and should be returned pending the outcome of his criminal trial. Patricia Hughes, who'd initially told me I had no legal recourse, was suddenly very interested in taking my case. "This is unprecedented," she said, reviewing the documents Dad had signed. "He essentially created an evidence trail that undermines everything he did to you. The court can't ignore this." The judge agreed. 3 months after I'd signed away my life, and 10 weeks after Dad signed away his, I got it all back. The company, the properties, the investments, everything returned to my name with an apology from the court for the unfortunate circumstances that had caused the transfer in the first place. Davidson Group was still interested in buying, though at a reduced price given all the legal drama. I negotiated hard and settled on $6.8 million, less than Dad's deal, but still enough to set me up for life. I didn't keep the house in Maplewood. Too many ghosts. I sold it and bought a condo downtown, something modern and clean with no memories attached. I started my own consulting firm, helping other people navigate complex real estate transactions. And yeah, I made damn sure every single one of my clients read every single document before signing. Dad's trial started 6 months later. I went to the courthouse on the day of his sentencing, not because I wanted to gloat, but because I needed to see it end. I needed to watch him face consequences, something I'd started to think would never happen. He looked smaller somehow, standing there in an ill-fitting suit, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. The judge read out the charges, the guilty verdicts, the sentence, 12 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 8. Dad's eyes found mine in the courtroom gallery. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I tried to find some trace of remorse in his face, some hint that he understood what he'd done. But there was nothing. Just anger, just resentment. Even now, even after losing everything, he still thought he was the victim in this story. I stood up and walked out before the bailiffs took him away. I didn't need to watch that part. I didn't need to see him in handcuffs or hear him shuffle toward whatever prison bus would take him to his new home. His story was over. Mine was just beginning. So that's my story. The worst betrayal of my life became the catalyst for the greatest comeback. My father taught me to never trust anyone, and in the end, that lesson was his own downfall. He spent 2 years planning to destroy me with paperwork I wouldn't read, and I destroyed him the exact same way. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this whole crazy journey. It means the world to me that you listened to the end. Now I want to hear from you. If someone you loved, a parent, a partner, a best friend, betrayed you like this, could you forgive them? Or would you do what I did and make them pay? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'm genuinely curious how you'd handle something like this. And hey, if you enjoyed this story, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want more wild true stories like this one, and definitely turn on that notification bell so you never miss the next video. Trust me, the stories only get crazier from here. Thanks again for being here. I'll see you in the next one.